Hey everyone! The story of how The Godfather got made is, believe it or not, almost as dramatic as the movie itself. It's this incredible tale of desperation, massive debt, and just a whole series of chaotic events that somehow, accidentally, created an absolute masterpiece. So think about it. What really goes into making a cinematic masterpiece? Is it some singular artistic vision, a perfect script? Well, how about a mountain of gambling debt? In the case of The Godfather, the answer is, weirdly, all of the above. Let's get into it. So, this whole story, it doesn't start with a director or a studio. Nope, it starts with an author, a guy named Mario Puzo, who was in some really, really deep financial trouble. Now, Puzo was a genuinely talented writer, but his last book, which was this really heartfelt story about Italian immigrants, well, critics liked it, but it didn't really sell. So his publisher basically told him straight up, look, if you want to sell more books, you got to write more about the mafia. And boy, did he need to sell more books. See, Puzo was a heavy gambler, and he had racked up this huge, huge debt to bookies. He was totally backed into a corner, and he needed a way out, like yesterday. So with that advice ringing in his ears and his desperate situation, he drafts an outline for a mafia story. But it was not an easy sell. In fact, 8 different publishers rejected it. He got so desperate that he took his rough idea, just his notes, to Paramount Pictures and sold them the film rights for a quick 10 grand, for a book that he hadn't even written yet. With that little bit of cash, Puzo was finally able to finish the novel. And when The Godfather was published in 1969, wow, it wasn't just a success. It was a total cultural phenomenon. The book stayed on the New York Times bestseller list for more than 15 months. Okay, so meanwhile, back at the studio, something kinda hilarious was going on. Paramount Pictures, they technically owned the rights to this massive bestseller, but they'd completely forgotten that they even had them. You have to understand the context here. In the late 60s, early 70s, gangster movies were considered total box office poison. They just consistently lost money. So Paramount had basically written Puzo's project off as just another cheap, forgettable film. But once the book became this runaway success, well, that changed everything. Suddenly, they had to make it. A studio producer named Robert Evans, he had this theory about why all the other gangster movies failed. They weren't made by Italians. He thought the movie absolutely needed what he called the smell of spaghetti. That authentic Italian-American touch. So the new plan was pretty simple. Make the movie cheap, but, and this was crucial, make sure the director is Italian-American. But that brilliant plan was a lot easier said than done. Paramount offered the job to a whole bunch of high-profile directors, including the legend himself, Sergio Leone, and they all turned it down. A lot of them just didn't want to romanticize the mafia. Eventually, they worked their way down the list to this young, super ambitious director named Francis Ford Coppola. Now, he'd already won an Oscar for writing the screenplay for Patton, but he wanted absolutely nothing to do with this job. He read Puzo's book and just found it kind of vulgar, complaining about all the violence and sex. He was all set to say no, and here's the crazy part. Just like Mario Puzo, Coppola had a very, very powerful reason to change his mind. Debt. His own independent film company, American Zoetrope, was about to go bankrupt. It owed a staggering $600,000. The final push came from his business partner, a young filmmaker you just might have heard of named George Lucas. He literally pleaded with Coppola, making it crystal clear that they were totally out of options. They needed the paycheck from this movie just to survive. It was, well, an offer Coppola couldn't refuse. So this is where the stage is set for the central conflict of the entire production. You have Coppola, this reluctant artist, who only took the job for the money. But the second he did, his creative ambitions started to clash big time with the studio's plan to make a quick, cheap movie. I mean, just look at this. The two visions could not have been more different. The studio wanted a cheap little gangster flick set in the modern day to save cash on cars and costumes. Coppola, he saw this sprawling, multi-generational epic. He was adamant it had to be a period piece, and he demanded a film on location in New York and even Sicily to get the authenticity right. All this artistic ambition, well, it came at a price. Coppola fought the studio on pretty much every single decision, and his vision just caused the budget to explode. It went from an initial $2.5 million to over $6 million. That's a massive increase that sent the studio executives into a total panic. But here's a great little story. As Coppola and Puzo started working together on the script, they really bonded over the shared obsession with getting the details right. In one famous moment, Coppola wrote a direction for a sauce recipe that said, "First, you brown the garlic." Puzo crossed it out and sent back a note that just read, "Gangsters don't brown garlic, you fry it." It was that level of attention to the tiniest things that would end up defining the film. So you've got to wonder, how did all these chaotic, desperate elements, the debts, the reluctance, the constant creative battles, how did they all come together? Well, somehow they combined into something truly extraordinary. So what was the secret recipe for this masterpiece? It was basically one part author drowning in gambling debts, one part studio trying to make a quick buck on a book they forgot they even owned, and one part brilliant but reluctant director who was just trying to save his company from going under, and of course, a little dash of perfectly fried garlic. And really, what this all proves is that The Godfather wasn't conceived as some timeless work of art from the get-go. No, it was born from pure, unfiltered desperation. It's really a monument to the idea that sometimes the greatest things we create don't come from a grand plan, but from talented people who just really, really need a paycheck.
Because in the end, for both Mario Puzo and Francis Ford Coppola, making The Godfather was quite simply an offer they couldn't refuse.